As I stood on the porch of my sister's house, a mix of pride and concern washed over me. I had always admired her unique taste and the way she transformed that old Victorian into a vibrant expression of herself. Yet, as a building inspector, I often found myself torn between enforcing regulations and appreciating the beauty of creative architecture. My job demanded a keen eye for detail and an unwavering commitment to community standards, but my heart was deeply rooted in family loyalty. I had spent years studying structures, each curve and beam telling a story, each design reflecting the dreams of its builder. In the world of regulations, I often felt like an impersonal enforcer, but at home, things were different. I wore my protective instincts like armor when it came to my sister. She meant the world to me. We had grown up sharing dreams and fears in that very house. Little did I know that this harmony would soon be challenged by a figure who believed she held ultimate authority over our neighborhood, a woman known infamously as Karen. Her obsession with rules would soon collide with my passion for preserving not just houses, but also the heart of our community. My sister's house was a tapestry of creativity and warmth that stood proudly on our street. The whimsical blend of pastel colors on the exterior reflected her vibrant personality, each hue carefully chosen to evoke a sense of joy. The ivy that crawled up the side seemed to embrace the home, while twinkling fairy lights adorned the porch, offering a cozy welcome to all who passed by. Inside, every room was a delightful mix of vintage finds and personal touches. Eclectic art hung alongside her collection of potted plants, each telling a story of its own. This charming abode was more than just walls and roofs, it embodied her spirit and dreams. As a child, she had envisioned a home that felt alive, filled with laughter and creativity, and she had made that dream a reality. The neighborhood adored her place, as much for its character as for the warmth she exuded to anyone who visited. To many in the community, her house stood as a symbol of individuality, a stark contrast to the homogeneous designs endorsed by the HOA. Yet, this vibrancy suddenly felt threatened, and I couldn't help but feel an impending dread. What would happen to this cherished space that so perfectly encapsulated who she was? Karen, the HOA member who had become a notorious figure in our neighborhood, was the embodiment of rigid conformity. With her sharp bob haircut and oversized glasses, she presented herself as an authority on all things related to community standards. Spotted frequently in her pastel blazer, clipboard in hand, she patrolled the streets like an enforcer, ready to impose her vision of order on anyone who dared to deviate from her rules. To Karen, individuality was a threat. She viewed our neighborhood as a canvas that required strict adherence to her color schemes and architectural guidelines. She had made it her mission to eradicate what she deemed as unsightly elements from the community, believing that any departure from her version of perfection tarnished its integrity. This relentless quest for uniformity led her to my sister's doorstep, where whimsical colors and eclectic decor were met with disdain. I could almost hear Karen's disapproving clucks echoing through the air as she pointed out what she perceived as violations. Her obsession with regulations seemed unyielding, and I recognized that her presence would challenge not only my sister's home but also the spirit of creativity that defined our community. As days turned into weeks, Karen intensified her campaign against my sister's home, meticulously documenting every perceived infraction in her quest for conformity. She began targeting what she deemed excessive ornamentation and non-compliant paint choices, sending letters of warning that grew increasingly hostile. The situation escalated quickly when Karen filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, citing minor code violations that most would overlook as trivial. The board, bowing to Karen's pressure and her relentless pursuit of order, voted unanimously in favor of proceeding with a demolition order. They claimed that the house posed a threat to the architectural integrity of the neighborhood, an assertion that rang hollow to those who understood its significance. My sister was devastated upon receiving the order. Her vibrant sanctuary, filled with memories and creativity, was now labeled as a violation to be erased rather than celebrated. Karen's victory felt unjust and cruel, yet she wore it like a badge of honor, convinced she had saved the neighborhood from eyesores. As I stood in disbelief at how swiftly this escalation had unfolded, I couldn't help but ponder the implications. How far would Karen go to enforce her narrow vision of community? It was clear this was only the beginning of an impending clash. When my sister received the news of the demolition order, it felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. She stood in her living room, surrounded by the very artifacts of her life, handmade decorations, memories imprinted in every nook and cranny, and disbelief washed over her. Her eyes widened as she clutched the letter, its stark words cutting through the warm ambience we had always cherished. "This can't be happening," she murmured, her voice trembling. The vibrant colors that once brought her joy now seemed to mock her with their brightness, reminding her of the home she had lovingly crafted over the years. Tears pooled in her eyes as she recalled countless evenings spent hosting friends and family, laughter echoing through those walls. The heartache of losing not just a house but a sanctuary was palpable. Feeling overwhelmed by anger and sorrow, she paced back and forth, grappling with feelings of helplessness against an unyielding authority. "How can they do this?" she exclaimed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. It was a painful realization that the essence of who she was could be so easily dismissed by someone intent on enforcing conformity. In that moment, I vowed to help her fight back. This battle was far from over. The tension in the air was palpable as I sat down with my sister, the weight of the demolition order pressing heavily on our hearts. It was time to unveil the truth that could change everything. Taking a deep breath, I mustered my courage and looked into her eyes. "There's something you need to know," I began, my voice steady but laced with urgency. "I'm a building inspector." Her eyes widened in shock, disbelief dancing across her features. "What? You never told me," she exclaimed, momentarily distracted from her despair. I quickly explained how I had spent years upholding community standards, but more importantly, how that knowledge could be leveraged to fight back against Karen's overreach. Just then, Karen arrived, clipboard in hand, ready to gloat over her perceived triumph. Sensing the shift in the atmosphere, she narrowed her eyes at us. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her authoritative tone unwavering. I stepped forward, a newfound determination bubbling within me. "Karen," I said firmly, "as a building inspector, I have the authority to review this situation and challenge your claims. This demolition order is unjust." The look of surprise on her face was almost gratifying, and I knew we were entering a new phase in our battle, a confrontation where truth and justice would finally take center stage. With my sister's future hanging in the balance, I set out to investigate the claims Karen had lodged against her home. Armed with my knowledge as a building inspector, I meticulously reviewed each alleged violation outlined in the demolition order. I started by measuring the dimensions of the porch railing, which Karen had deemed excessively ornate. To my relief, it fell well within the community guidelines. Next, I examined the colorful flower beds that Karen had criticized for their wild appearance. They were thriving and absolutely compliant with landscaping regulations. I gathered documentation, taking photographs and noting every detail to build a solid case. Consulting the HOA guidelines, I compared Karen's claims with the standards everyone else seemed to follow without issue. It became increasingly evident that her motivations were rooted more in personal bias than legitimate concern for community aesthetics. After hours of digging through records, I discovered that several homes in our neighborhood sported similar, if not more pronounced, deviations from the rules yet remained untouched by Karen's scrutiny. This information would be crucial in demonstrating that her actions were not only unfair but also inconsistent. Equipped with evidence and a renewed sense of purpose, I was ready to confront Karen and defend my sister's beloved home. As word spread about the impending demolition of my sister's home, the reaction from our neighbors was swift and passionate. Initially hesitant, many began to rally around us, their frustrations bubbling to the surface as they recounted their own encounters with Karen's zealous enforcement. It turned out that her strict adherence to rules had created a palpable tension in the community, with several residents feeling suffocated by her relentless scrutiny. In quiet gatherings at local cafes and during casual walks, neighbors shared stories of minor infractions they'd received, warnings about lawn decorations or shrub heights that felt more personal than legitimate. A sense of camaraderie emerged, as everyone recognized that Karen's actions were less about community standards and more about power play. The elderly couple down the street expressed outrage that their beloved birdbath had been deemed a visual nuisance, while another neighbor lamented how her cheerful mailbox had been flagged for non-compliance. This collective frustration ignited a new energy in our fight. Supporters voiced their intention to attend the upcoming HOA meeting, ready to stand united against Karen's overreach. The realization that we were not alone brought my sister a glimmer of hope. Together, we could challenge this injustice and reclaim the spirit of our community. The tension in the air was thick as we entered the HOA meeting. Neighbors filled the room, their eyes fixed on Karen, who sat at the front, exuding an air of authority. I felt my heart race, but I reminded myself that I was prepared. Armed with documentation and photographs, I stepped forward to present my findings. "Karen," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me, "I've conducted a thorough investigation into the claims you made against my sister's home." The murmurs from the crowd signaled their interest as I laid out the evidence. "The porch railing you deemed excessively ornate is well within community guidelines, and her flower beds are thriving and compliant with landscaping standards." Karen's expression shifted from smug confidence to disbelief as I pointed out inconsistencies in her previous complaints about other homes that had similar or worse violations yet faced no scrutiny. "It seems that your enforcement is not applied equally," I concluded, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. The atmosphere in the room shifted, whispers grew louder as neighbors exchanged knowing glances. It was clear that Karen's authority was being challenged. Sensing her discomfort, I pressed on, determined to ensure that my sister's home would not be sacrificed on the altar of conformity any longer. As the meeting progressed, I could see the realization dawning on Karen's face. The murmurs of discontent from our neighbors grew louder, and the once formidable confidence she exuded began to wane. I sensed her grip on power slipping as she glanced around the room, noting the supportive faces of those who had previously been intimidated by her authority. The weight of the evidence I presented, coupled with their solidarity, was beginning to take its toll. In a critical moment, Karen's facade cracked and a longtime resident brought up her inconsistency in enforcing the rules. "You can't just target the homes you don't like, Karen," he shouted, frustration evident in his voice. Her eyes darted toward me, seeking the defiance that had emerged in this unexpected wave of community support. It was as if she was finally understanding that her actions could unravel not just her reputation but also her standing within a network she had worked so hard to control. I leaned in, my voice steady yet firm. "If you continue down this path, Karen, there could be legal ramifications for misusing your authority." The gravity of my words hung in the air. It became clear to everyone that Karen's overreach might lead to consequences far beyond her pursuit of conformity, forcing her to reconsider her actions in light of community solidarity and potential legal repercussions. In the wake of the HOA meeting, we embarked on a complex legal journey to appeal the demolition order. With my knowledge as a building inspector, I guided my sister through the labyrinth of paperwork and regulations. We gathered evidence meticulously, compiling documents that illustrated not only her compliance with community standards but also the inconsistencies in Karen's enforcement. We began attending community meetings where we presented our case. The support from our neighbors bolstered our efforts, turning what was once an isolated struggle into a community-wide movement. They shared their own stories and grievances against Karen's reign of terror, creating a chorus of voices calling for fairness. As the weeks passed, we filed formal appeals and engaged in discussions with HOA board members, emphasizing the need for a more equitable approach to rule enforcement. I coached my sister on how to articulate her love for her home and its significance to the community, transforming her emotional pleas into compelling arguments. Finally, the day came for a crucial hearing where I stood beside her, ready to challenge the board's previous decision. As we presented our case, I felt a surge of hope, not only were we fighting for her house, but we were also advocating for the individuality and spirit that defined our neighborhood. Together, we were determined to turn the tide against Karen's oppressive tactics. The day of the hearing arrived, and the air was charged with anticipation as neighbors gathered to show their support for my sister. Each one had brought heartfelt signs adorned with phrases like, "Preserve our homes," and "Celebrate individuality." Dotted throughout the crowd were familiar faces, those who had shared their own stories of frustration with Karen's strict enforcement, uniting us in a shared struggle against injustice. As we filed into the hearing room, I could feel the warmth of community spirit enveloping us. Neighbors whispered words of encouragement, nodding at my sister, who seemed more grounded with each passing moment. The elderly couple from 2 streets over approached her, offering homemade cookies and a reminder that they were all in this fight together. Their small gesture was a testament to the bond we were forming. It was about more than just saving a house, it was about preserving our way of life. When it came time for members of the community to speak, one by one they stood up, sharing personal anecdotes about how Karen's actions had affected them. Each voice added weight to our cause, creating an undeniable resonance that filled the room. I watched as Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, recognizing that the tide had turned decisively against her. This united front was a powerful testament to what standing together could achieve. As the hearing reached its critical point, the tension in the room was palpable. More residents stood to share their experiences with Karen's oppressive enforcement of rules, amplifying the growing chorus of dissent against her authority. One by one, they recounted instances where she had targeted their homes for minor infractions that others had overlooked, each story adding fuel to the fire. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her confidence visibly waning as she faced a united front. The community no longer feared her, instead, they were emboldened by their shared experiences and the realization that standing together could bring about change. It became clear that they were not just defending my sister's home, they were challenging an unjust system. Suddenly, a prominent voice from within the crowd called out, "It's time for Karen to be held accountable for her actions." This statement echoed through the room, igniting a wave of applause and cheers from those gathered. Karen's face paled as she realized that her previously unchallenged authority was rapidly disintegrating. In that moment, I knew we had reached a turning point, the tide had definitively turned against her. The community spirit was undeniable, and it was evident that Karen would face serious repercussions for her overreaching behavior as we moved closer to reclaiming our neighborhood's spirit and individuality. As the dust settled and the community began to reflect on the outcome, my sister and I found ourselves sitting together on her porch, absorbing the lessons learned from this tumultuous journey. "I never realized how important our home was to so many people," she said, looking out at the neighborhood that had rallied around her. "It's more than just a house, it represents our individuality and the spirit of this community." I nodded in agreement, appreciating her insight. This experience has shown us that resilience is rooted in support and solidarity. We have to uphold standards, but not at the cost of suppressing who we are as individuals. The realization that community values should embrace diversity rather than enforce conformity resonated deeply with both of us. We discussed how Karen's actions had galvanized our neighbors into a movement for justice, revealing that standing up against injustice can foster deeper connections among residents. The fight had been tough, but it brought forth a renewed commitment to protect not just homes but also the unique character and creativity that make our neighborhood vibrant. As we shared a quiet moment of reflection, it became clear that moving forward would involve not only vigilance against overreach but also a celebration of the individuality that makes our community truly special. As we stood on the porch, looking out at the familiar landscape of our neighborhood, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had undertaken. This experience has illuminated a fundamental truth: homes are not just structures, they embody our identities and the memories we hold dear. Each vibrant color, every quirky decoration in my sister's house told a story, a testament to her spirit and individuality. In standing up against Karen's oppressive tactics, we learned that true community values lie in supporting one another and embracing our differences. It's essential to uphold standards that foster safety and harmony, but those standards should never come at the expense of personal expression. Our fight was about more than just preserving a house, it was about honoring the very essence of who we are as individuals within a collective. We emerged from this battle not only with a renewed commitment to protect our homes but also with an understanding of the power of unity. We realized that when we stand together, we can challenge injustice and create a space where everyone's voice matters. Moving forward, let us cherish our individuality while fostering an environment where every home reflects the unique identity of its inhabitants, a true testament to the heart of our community.